Hello everyone and welcome back to another AFL Fantasy Fanatics head-to-head episode where we put two players up against one another to see who will be picking out of the two. This is episode 3 of the series. If you haven't checked out the first 2 episodes, episode 1 was with the Warn Dog where we chatted about Matt Kennedy and Riley Sanders. Very relevant, obviously, with Adam Troy unfortunately being out due to injury. And then we chatted with, obviously, from the Ball Boys in the second episode with a couple of premium midfielders that are two of my favourites in Jordan Dawson and Andrew Brayshaw. So if you check those first 2 out and, put in the comments for those videos and let us know who'd be picking out of those 2. But today we got 2 other midfielders, a little bit cheaper than Dawson and Brayshaw in Tim Taranto and a little bit more expensive in Connor Rozee. And joining me is the other half of the Ball Boys. We're going back-to-back, which is the plan. And it's that is exactly what's happened. It is Luke from the Ball Boys. Luke, mate, how are you?
Good, mate. Thanks for having me on. I'm glad you saved the better Ball Boy for second. That was a wise move from you. You always got to finish with a bang. So I appreciate you've been doing good stuff, mate, recently. Congratulations on the 3K on YouTube. I think it's worthwhile congratulating you publicly so everyone knows that, that sort of the hard work that you do is paying off with a lot of people wanting to tune in and listen to yours and Guesty's content, obviously, amongst others now as well.
Yes, exactly. No, beautiful. Thanks, mate. Very much appreciated. And I should have also said in the introduction, the reigning, defending, undisputed content creators cup champion. And
I feel like
coach of the Oxlongs.
I feel like when he says that, he's trying to put the moz on me every time. I'm just like, nah, I'll park that. I don't need a moz. It's hard enough as it is taking on some of the talent in the content creating community.
Yeah, well, if people missed it as well, Luke beat me in the grand final. So I'm no ill will towards Luke. I'm just annoyed of the boys not putting up a good enough effort in the last round to get the job done. So, but yeah, 2 of the players though that are going to be in discussion for our teams heading into this season is Connor Rozee and Tim Taranto, both underpriced. So for both the players at the moment, both under that $1 million mark because both had interrupted seasons last year due to injury and a couple of poor scores. So we'll start with Connor Rozee. So Connor Rozee is priced at $996K with an average of 97.1 from last season. 16.8% of the competition are currently owning him. Obviously, these numbers will increase or potentially decrease as we get close to the season with more teams registering and picking these players. And then Tim Taranto priced at $980K, so 16K cheaper there. 95.5 average last season, 11.7 ownership. So very, very close in ownership. So I think it's going to be a really good discussion and also close in price. Luke will be taking Tim Taranto. I'll be taking Connor Rozee. So we'll start off with our guest and we'll chat about Tim Taranto. So Luke, mate, do you want to chat to us about Tim Taranto and why you think he could potentially be a good pick for us in AFL Fantasy in 2025?
Yeah, Bales, well, you mentioned ownership percentage off the bat, and you said that they're quite similar, Rozee and Taranto, and I kind of get the impression that could be because of the way people are potentially structuring up in their midfields this season. It looks like that there's plenty of value amongst kind of the mid-priced midfielders, and so you're kind of squeezed in a few ways into this box where maybe you feel like you can only pick one of these guys. Before I start talking about Timmy T, I'm big on Rozee as well. So anything I say, don't take it as a knock so much on Rozee, because I'll be supportive of a lot of the things that you have to say as well, Bales. But if we're talking about Timmy Taranto, you can't go past his season 2 years ago. So for the first 14 games of the season, the guy was just lights out. I think the stat I've got here is that he averaged 124 over that stretch. And if you're looking at a guy that's priced at 95 that can average 124 in a 14-game stretch, there's no way that you can just park that and not give it any consideration.
Huge,
so, yeah, it's massive. I mean, what gives people concern is obviously what happened last season. So not only was Taranto scoring down, he had an injured period. I think he got injured at training from memory, so we don't have like an injury score baked into his price. But the problem too was that Richmond were just horribly stanky. So a lot's been made about the market share debate. So if Richmond can't score points, well, how can we expect Taranto to score points even if he is Richmond's leading scorer? The thing is, Richmond, and I'll lump West Coast in there as well, were historically bad. Off the top of my head, that the stat was you had to go back maybe 13 years. You'll know this, Bales. You had to go back like 13 years to Melbourne to find another team that went, COVID aside, that went less than 1,400 total points in fantasy across, like averaged across a year. So will Richmond be historically bad again? There's a lot of people out there that would say, yes, from a football perspective, they could be historically bad. But something else that gives me a little bit more confidence about what I think Taranto can do is what scoring has left Richmond. So it's obviously pretty common knowledge that many players moved on from Richmond over the offseason. And I think Mitch might have calculated it that of those players that left that were in starting positions, to cover those players, the rookie, if you were going to say that rookies were going to come in, the rookies would have to average about 70 points each just to cover the amount of total points that have left that Richmond starting squad. And I don't think anyone's sitting there thinking that, 6, 7 rookies are going to come in and each average 70 points each. So it begs the question, where do those points go? Well, a lot of people are hoping that, that some of those points go to Jaiden Short off half back. I'm one of those people. But I actually think that some of those points could go to Timmy T as well. This guy, for a guy that's a bit of a paddle foot, he can't kick over a jam tin. He does love to jump in on a little 45 and get a cheeky +6, which is something that we love as fantasy coaches. So maybe I'm trying to look at it a little bit too much glass half full, but all of those kind of market share, Richmond sucking kind of narratives, I feel like I can twist them to favour Timmy T. And one more thing before I let you dive in, Bales, is that if you go back and have a look at sort of Timmy T's last kind of 6 seasons, GWS and Richmond, take COVID out of it, but in seasons where he plays a full season, he doesn't have any of those niggling injuries, he scores big. So if you go back and look at 2019, he's played 26 games for GWS, he's averaged 111. 2021, he's played 24 games, he averages 106. 2023, obviously, is that monster year, 23 games and averages 112. Any of those scores that I just listed, we'd be happy with for a guy priced at 96. So if you're backing him to play a full season, which we never pick guys expecting them not to play a full season, then the proof's kind of in the pudding. Wishful thinking by me, maybe. What do you got for me?
But yeah, so Phil, wondering why I was looking down a couple of times as well. There was like a tiny spider while you were talking, so I had to try and sort of wait till we had a moment to pause, quickly kill it, and then I could do it. But unfortunately, it's edited out, and I can't actually make it a short. Would have been something funny.
Hey,
people to go on. But anyway,
tiny spider. It was a huntsman, mate. It was huge. Yeah. Let the audience know.
Exactly. Yeah, it's crawling on my legs. I had to get rid of it. So, but yeah, cool. But no, in terms of Tim Taranto, that's as you referenced there, that I think we all go back to, and I know you are big on, and I know, and some people say, but I know you're biggest on it. You always talk about you want to paint yourself a narrative in why you're picking someone, and then if you're happy with that narrative and going in confident with that pick, then that's sort of what helps in picking these players. And I feel like I think the narrative people can paint is the fact that Taranto averaged over that 120 in the first half of not last year, the year before in 2023. And that's the potential upside that we've got. And that was in a Richmond team that weren't necessarily that much better than what they are now. Obviously, yes, they've lost a few players from that team, but they were still losing games. They weren't winning all the games. So whether he can get back to that 120 range, obviously, I don't think he's going to go that high, but I still think it's realistic that he can go 110. I think that's a narrative I think we can try and sort of think to ourselves that that's the ceiling, 110, 115 that Taranto can get to, because they're not going to tag him. Richmond, obviously, as we know, are going to struggle. So the teams aren't going to be tagging, I don't think, really anyone anyway. And if they're going to tag someone, it's going to be someone like a Jaiden Short type player, where maybe on the outside try and quell his influence but I don't expect that to be a main concern anyway. It's just for me, and I want to ask you about this as well, is that obviously Rowan from the AFL Fantasy Marketplace obviously does a lot of the market share stuff, and they use that in a lot of the NBA and NFL stuff, and it's been slowly introduced into the AFL Fantasy space, which I think is fantastic. And Taranto is probably going to have a good market share, right? But as you mentioned with Richmond, they were historically bad last year with West Coast in terms of fantasy points scored for. Do you think that even though Taranto's going to have a big enough market share, do you think that Richmond are going to score enough points as a team to allow him to average that 105 plus average that we'd be hoping for if we're starting him?
Yeah, well, it's interesting that you bring that up, Buzz, because in that 2023 season where he was amazing, he had 7.5% of the market share. Last year, it was down to 6.7% of the market share in, like you said, a historically bad team. Maybe he doesn't get back to 7.5%, but had he gone 7.5% last year, he would have averaged 105. So even with Richmond being historically bad, had he averaged that equivalent market share, like we would expect in an un-injury interrupted season, it's 105, and 105 we're taking from 96 for a guy who's underpriced, especially if he can give us some big scores potentially to start. So maybe it's not that 7.5%, but I also I also can't imagine a world where Richmond are that historically bad fantasy-wise 2 consecutive years. So I think Richmond will be horrible footballing-wise, terrible to watch. But would you agree that sometimes when teams know they're going to be absolutely disgusting, they go into a little bit of that self-preservation mode? And it's guys like Jaiden Short and Tim Taranto who can just kind of stem that momentum and just maybe do a little bit of waxy boy stuff around the ground, which is what we're after. So I kind of feel like that more conservative game style in patches could actually benefit us as fantasy coaches.
Yeah, and we've seen it with North Melbourne, right, as well. Like we've seen that some of those players in the midfield and particularly off half back have been able to score really well in a struggling side, and even West Coast as well. At times, their defenders have scored quite well, and maybe the odd midfielder or two. So I feel like Taranto is a better fantasy player than even a lot of players from those two clubs, and I know they're going to struggle, but I guess Taranto's got the game. You mentioned before, he likes that little short 45-meter kick. He'll get back in defense, get a few of those +6s. If Richmond are trying to make it a contested game, he's going to rack up those tackles. We know that he does love a tackle, and he's one of those players that he's really the mix of, and I know MJ chatted about this on the coach panel when they chatted about Taranto, but he's that perfect mix, that fantasy player where he's not going to get tagged. He's got that mix of inside-outside game where he gets those marks and tackles and can get the ball. So that's obviously what the positive is. The question obviously is, does he have that full-time midfield role, which we expect him to, but has been training some portions up forward? And do they want to get those younger guys through there? That's the question. I still think they've got to have a veteran presence in there. And I think Taranto, not really a veteran per se, he's obviously in his mid-20s, but in terms of veteran compared to the younger guys. So it'll just be interesting, I think, to see what he can score. I think these Pracky games is going to be really interesting to watch and see what his role is and what Richmond are going to do. But final point before we move to Rozee is that tough run that we also chatted about pre-pod as well, that he's got a bit of a tougher run compared to a Connor Rozee. So he opens up with like a Carlton and a Hawthorn and a couple of tougher matchups. So how do you see that with Taranto? Do you see it as not an issue because he's not the guy that's going to be tagged, or do you think in a tougher matchup, Richmond already not going to score that many fantasy points, that it could be a bit of a negative, and maybe he's a guy that we potentially look to upgrade to after the first month or so when his run does start to open up a little bit?
Yeah, I think it's definitely a valid point, and it's something that concerns me, and something that we'll see in a second is a pro for Connor Rozee, his start to the season. The only thing that makes me a little nervous is what you mentioned about the fact that we don't see him as being a tag target. Richmond aren't going to be good, so there's no need from opposition teams to go to work so much on him. It's early in the season, so we often don't see teams go to work too hard early in the season. And like you said as well, the way he scores his points, it can be an absolute mud heap, and he'll get 12 tackles, or, in cleaner conditions, he will pop up for little +6s. So I'm a little bit nervous with a guy that we have seen historically good scoring from, priced at 95, that if you kind of roll the dice on, it's a couple of tough games early, is there a scenario where he kind of gets away from you and you've missed the jump a little bit? Maybe, but you're right in saying run is definitely a factor that we should be looking at, and that's probably a good segue to Connor Rozee and his brilliant run to start the season.
Yeah, exactly. No, beautiful. Love that. Love your work, Luke, to segue that there. It's very, very good. But yeah, Connor Rozee does. What was that?
I like being the only guy in the chair here. I think I got the bit of it's going to my head, I think.
I'm sure. I was thinking you might wear the hat as well, like the number 16. Put it on, and
I've cut it out of the shot. It's sitting there. It's staring me right in the face. I don't like it.
Yeah, hopefully we'll both get a hat this year, mate. But yeah, Connor Rozee, hopefully, or Taranto will be one of those guys that help us there. But Connor Rozee, obviously didn't have as good a year last year as the year before, right? He had a couple of injuries to deal with, and none more so than that hamstring injury suffered against St Kilda pretty early, pretty sort of like mid third quarter, I want to say there. So only played the 57% game time there and scored 89. So that was a 125, 130 score waiting to happen there. He was absolutely dominating, had the 19 touches there. But unfortunately, hamstring injury. The following week, surprisingly, as a Crows fan, showed up for the showdown. I didn't think he was going to actually play that game, and he did, and now unfortunately didn't have a good impact. He only scored 51 from just over half a game. He was subbed out, and then he missed the following 3 weeks. Came back against North Melbourne, played a lot forward, still didn't really look that good. Only scored the 43 points from, again, low game time, 74%. it was pretty much from round 14 onwards. So he obviously missed then a couple of weeks after that. So I think he had his bye there, but he missed round 12 and then round 13. So he had the double 2 weeks off to get fully fit and then ready to go from round 14 onwards. So from that point on, he scored the 72 against the Giants first game after the bye. But after that, he only went under the ton on another 3 occasions. A couple of them were 70s, which wasn't great, against Carlton and Fremantle. And then the other one was a 95 against St Kilda. But the rest of them were some good scores. So you got like a 115, a 147, a 126, a 113. So some good scores there. And that 73 against Freo last game, it just didn't really look like he was trying much. Obviously, Port had the game mostly in hand. Obviously, a friend of the show, Tom, coach of Pom United, remembers that game, unfortunately, fondly. And then you obviously had the Carlton game. He got tagged in that one. And then obviously Giants as well. So there is a narrative to paint in terms of why those scores were poor. If you remove those injury games, he averaged 103.4 from the 17 games. If you wanted to be generous and take away that Giants game as the first game, he sort of was getting back to full fitness. He averaged 105.4, which is similar to what he averaged the year before. So in 2023, averaged 103.5. So very similar actually to that average if you include that 70 against the Giants. So I think that means he's 6 points under the value, and that's obviously baked in with the injuries. But can he improve that as well? And I feel like that's the point. I think he can go to that 105, even may reach that 107, 108. Is we mentioned the run. The run to start for Port Adelaide is really, really good. One of the best for midfielders out there. So he starts off with Collingwood, who we know are a good matchup for midfielders. Then goes into Richmond, who obviously a very good matchup there. Essendon, who's a good matchup. Then he's got St Kilda. Obviously, he was going well against them last year. So that's an okay matchup. Hawthorn, Sydney, not great. But I still think Butters is the guy that gets the attention. I still think Rozee can score well enough regardless. Then has North Melbourne, Bulldogs, Adelaide, Geelong, and Fremantle. So it's a pretty good run. Though those 2 games of Sydney Hawthorn are the only 2 games I could really see that may be slightly concerning. But as Luke and Mitch have coined the term as well, on the table indicating toughness, or as referred to, what's it referred to, Luke, there?
Affectionately known as the tit, but I can't talk too much. It's legal proceedings underway, is copyright infringements, so I don't want to talk too much.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, obviously with Rosee's good run, that's obviously the tick in Rosee's favour. Is that something that just on focusing on Rozee specifically, is that something you're looking at potentially with starting him? The fact that he's got that early run, his value, and he can get you off the potential flying start.
Yeah, definitely, Bales. And there's kind of 2 things I want to talk about. First being, I said at the top, is I like Connor Rozee as a pick too, so I'm not really going to battle you on him. But this to me fits the perfect narrative of underpriced premium. Like, this is what you want, isn't it? You want a guy who has shown that he can do it in the past, who has a couple of injury-affected scores, so he's like what people will say is baked in value. I agree with them. This is the perfect narrative. This is what you want to see, because you're not speculating on, a bit like Taranto, you're speculating, I hope he can get back to the heights. You're just saying, well, there was a reason that he didn't score, didn't average 105. The other thing I really like about the Connor Rozee pick too is that I think for those first 3 games in particular, he's a guy that you can throw a VC on. I haven't looked into the details of when they play during the weekend, but if you're looking for an underpriced premium that in the first 3 games could potentially give you a 120, 130, he's a guy that can do it. Like, he's shown previously that he'll happily beat up on shit teams, and in round 2 he's going to play the shittest team. So there's every chance that you can throw the VC on him. A little bit more speculative maybe to throw the C on, but the VC is definitely there. One thing that doesn't really concern me so much, but based on what I hear from the community at large is, well, Jason Horne-Francis is going to improve. It's not necessarily my opinion for reasons that we can go into, but that's the narrative at large, is that he's going to improve. How do you think, Bales, that impacts Rozee more than Butters? I think Butters is what he is. Could Horne-Francis improving impact Rozee?
Yeah, and that's obviously the interesting question, right? And that's why Rozee is an interesting player, because I still think he's underpriced, but how much potentially is he underpriced? Is he more just a 100 to 102 guy, and Horne-Francis takes that step up to that 9,500, or is he more a 105 plus, and Horne-Francis is going to be what he is this year, just a 90 to 95 guy? And I know that Supercoach DR was talking with MJ on Coach Pan in the 50, talking about Will Ashcroft and talking about how you don't see many teams having 3 players in the midfield averaging over 100. We've seen the Dogs have done it multiple years with the likes of Bont, Treloar, McRae, Dunkley, Bailey Smith. Guys like that have all averaged over 100. Libber as well. I think he's averaged over 100 a couple of times as well. Brisbane got close, obviously, with Neil, Dunkley, McCluggage, but we haven't seen other teams do it. So and Port aren't a huge scoring fantasy team as it is. So I don't know if I can still see all 3 scoring over, averaging over 100, unless they're all like between 100 and 103, unless they're all evenly spread. So I am still of the belief, I think Horne-Francis is going to be somewhere around that 92 to 97, 98 range. I think he'll be in the mid-90s, which is why I still think Rozee can go that 105. He's captain of the club, been playing 95% midfield in the preseason. Granted, preseason obviously is different. We've got to see it in games first. I still expect Port will change a couple of things, obviously, after, again, a failure in the finals last year. And I expect Rozee to be a big part of that midfield mix. They've also got those other guys in the forward line in the trade period and in draft, like your Joe Berries and Joe Richards. So they're going to take some of that forward time. Jack Lukosius as well. So I don't think there's a need for Rozee to necessarily spend this bulk time forward. He might get the odd rest or 2 forward, which is, if that's better than, if that's instead of a bench stint, that's fantastic. More opportunity for points. Maybe his game time even takes a bit of a lift as well, because his game time last year obviously is a little bit lower because he had a couple of injuries, but 81%. He's been a mid-80s for most of his career. A couple of ones closer to 80, sort of 82%, but a few of them like 84, 86%. And I felt last year would have been about the same. So that's sort of where I sit. Is that sort of your thinking as well? Do you think Horne-Front is going to take that jump up to maybe bring a Butters or a Rozee down, or do you see it a bit similar? Horne-Front mid-90s. The other guys are going to go over 100.
Yeah, this could be the one where I die on the hill and am just absolutely wrong, and I've got to eat my humble pie. But the Horne-Francis thing, I can't see anything other than people kind of pointing to natural progression. I know that there's a little bit of fluctuation in his CBA percentages in the games where he did spend some time in there last year. But it's, to me, I don't see why Port Adelaide would increase his CBAs to a crazy level. They've never been a team where any one player has played a majority share of CBAs. Like, they don't have a guy like an LDU or a Tom Green that plays, like 80, almost 90% CBAs. And Horne-Francis is just such a good player across the board that he's the kind of guy that he could have 15 possessions and take the game away from you. Have 15 possessions, kick 3 amazing goals, and every center stoppage is in there. He's breaking a line. Like, he's that kind of player, and I would love him to become an accumulator, especially because we can pick him as a forward. And if he shows us that and forces my hand, I'm not going to be too proud to go there. But this is the one that I'm a little bit kind of happy at the moment to go against the trend, and I think that bodes well for Rozee.
Yeah, I agree. I don't currently have Horne-Francis in my team. He's been in and out at F1, but yeah, currently Rozee is been a guy I've been definitely heavily considering along with Tim Taranto, which brings us to the decision for between these two. So, Luke, if you had to pick one of them, who are you picking out of Tim Taranto and Connor Rozee?
I think I'm going to be that guy and have a sore ass because I'm sitting on the fence. There's every chance I pick both of them. Right at the moment, Timmy T's at the Oxlongs and Connor Rozee is just kind of lurking in the showers at the minute. But this is all very dependent on how the structure ends up playing out, isn't it? Because I said off the top that I'm, from my perspective anyway, I'm liking the look of value in the midfield, both with some of the rookie names we've got and some of those mid prices. And so for me, that's just left Taranto as the guy in there. Yeah, but obviously plenty of water to go under the bridge, so Rozee could join him.
Yeah. So Taranto for you. I've been very much like you. I think this is why this discussion's fascinating, because I think that there are going to be a lot of people that will go one of them and not both. For most of the preseason, I've been Taranto, but as we're getting closer to the season, hearing just a little few reports that he is training forward as well. Richmond don't, I think, necessarily have to play him full-time mid. Obviously, they're not going to. It'd be a shock to every single AFL fan if they made finals or even got close to doing that, where they'd need Taranto in there. So I still feel like there'll be the odd stint forward. which is then almost going to, and then the hard run. And then you look at Rozee, where you know what his role's going to be. He's got the easy run to start. That's what we're looking for. You want these underpriced guys to have a good run as well. I know that's not everything, but if there's a sort of splitting hairs, that good run might just be that thing that edges you towards. So that's why I'm slightly going Rozee, but it could easily change. It changes daily for me. So it could easily go back to Taranto before we start the season. So as you mentioned, though, you've obviously got Taranto in your side. Rozee's currently lurking around the squad and potentially getting in there. I've got Rozee and Taranto as the same as well, but I literally took Taranto out last night. So it's pretty much, I swap it around on a daily basis. They're 16K apart. So it's pretty easy to do that. So I definitely could see me having both. But I think do you think you've got to have one of these guys though? Do you reckon it's important for structure to, if you have one of those guys at the top, like your Brayshaws, your Bonts, your Dawsons, guys like that, and then maybe pairing him with one of these guys here?
Yeah, that's the way most of the structures have kind of fallen for me. Is I'm really keen on Andy Brayshaw, like a lot of people are, I think, and then it's either Taranto and Rozee, or it might be Taranto or Rozee, depending on how deep I want to go with some of those mid-price options. But this to me is, and you can tell we're flip-flopping more than a catfish and a moon bouncer. But if I don't pick Connor Rozee and I do pick Tim Taranto, there is every chance I'm sitting there after round 3 going, Luke, the writing was on the wall. We always say pick the good run. Why the fuck did you not do that? So, I'm probably firming closer to, if structure allows, I'm probably looking closer at both. But I mean, we say all these things, and what's the date? Feb 6. So, hey,
Exactly. Beautiful. Well, that wraps us up for the 3rd episode of the Head2Head series. Let us know in the comments below who you guys are going out of Tim Taranto and Connor Rozee. I'm actually really interested to see what you guys watching at home. So every person watching this video, put in the comments below who you're picking between the two. Have you got either? Have you got both? Have you got none? Let us know in the comments who you guys are going to be picking for, obviously, the season. Obviously, granted, as Luke said, it's the 6th of Feb. And if you've got any other fantasy questions as well, put them in the comments and I can answer those when I can. And make sure you also leave a like and subscribe to our YouTube channel. 4K is the next big goal for us to be hitting. So make sure you guys, it takes 2 seconds to hit the like and then hit sub if you haven't done that. So that'd be very much appreciated. But Luke, mate, thank you very much for jumping on with us today, mate. Where can the people find you across the socials? And then also, obviously, Mitch shouted out, but we'll give it another shout out again. The Patreon, where can people find that as well?
Yeah, double dipping on that. First of all, thanks for having me on, Bales. I always like jumping on and doing some content with you, so I appreciate that. Well, at LukeRojo17, I think it is on Twitter. You won't get much. You won't get much activity, but if you want to follow Mitch, I think it's at Ball Boys Fantasy. So you're going to get far more activity from that account. You mentioned the Patreon. We wanted to do something new and a bit different and exciting this year that we obviously hadn't done before. So we've launched a Patreon, www.patreon.com/ballboys. And we've got a host of different things that we're trying to make exclusive for that Ball Boys family of people that are keen to be a part of it. And it's been really enjoyable so far, getting to know people a little bit deeper and hopefully providing some insights where required as well. So yeah, we're enjoying it, and get on over there and join the family if you like.
Yeah, beautiful. No, get around it. I think the other thing you might have to do on the content as well is got to make a video of maybe analogy school, because your analogies are great. I struggle to come up with them best of times, mate. So you need to teach us the secrets about how you can come up with these analogies, mate.
No, just off the cuff, mate. Just if you can't convince them, confuse them. That's what I say. So
yeah. Beautiful, mate. Love your work. Make sure you go and follow Luke and Mitch on the socials and join in the Patreon, because beautiful, doing fantastic stuff over there on the YouTube and then the Patreon as well. And as I said to Mitch previously, the Friday afternoons, favorite time of the week, jumping on, tuning into you guys as you guys have a cold one and chat some fantasy. And then obviously everyone then hopefully jumps over to us and has this sort of double dose of fantasy content ahead of the Friday partial lockout. So beautiful. We'll be back for another episode. It'll be next week on Monday. One of my fellow AFL Fantasy Fanatics, Guesty, will be jumping on with me to be chatting about a couple of forwards, one of them being one of his Eagles as well. So it could be one or two players there. So interesting to see who we chat about. Make sure you guys tune into that. But as always, thanks for everyone tuning in, and we'll catch you guys in the next video on Sunday for our podcast, and then head-to-head video on the Monday. So thanks, guys. We're out. See ya.